This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Get a whole month free at mubi.com/SpikimaMovies. There's a director I've been actively refusing to talk about for the longest time despite my love. His name is Michale Haneke, and his films are notoriously uncomfortable to watch due to their unique style and execution of difficult topics. That's why I was avoiding him. But here we are, and that means I've watched all Michale Haneke films back to back in 3 days to see what makes his films so unsettling yet beautiful. So buckle up and let's get right to it. Can't believe I'm doing this. Even if you've never heard of his name, you've probably heard of his film Funny Games.
Sie wetten mit uns, dass sie morgen 9 noch leben, wir mit ihnen, dass sie tot sind, okay?
This film, which was originally made in 1997 in German, was remade shot for shot in 2007 with Naomi Watts and Tim Roth to reach a broader audience that Haneke explained were more fitting to his original target demographic. And while this film is therefore one of his more popular films, it's not necessarily the most representative one out of the 12 feature films he's made, of which 2 of them have won the Palme d'Or and none of them any easier to watch. But his films don't feature an explosion of on-screen violence or explicit content, at least not as much as you would expect. Instead, they aim at painting vivid frustration, the kind that's aroused from lagging and interrupted visual style, anticlimactic storytelling, questions that are rendered unsolvable by various plot holes, and of course, the generally depressing subject matter. It certainly doesn't help that his characters are always named George and Anne. There's a bizarre sense of gloom to the repeating names. But the primary method he employs to build frustration lies in careful establishment of an artistic hierarchy, where the director not only commands the film universe, but is deemed superior to the participating audience for the duration of the film. The first thing that comes to mind when describing Haneke's style is his use of slow-tempo montage and minimal camera movement. Haneke has repeatedly expressed his interest in eliminating manipulation of the time frame by presenting events in real time. Not only does it benefit the formal approach he has for his films, but it also generally helps sustain the tonal suspense of the scene and keeps the image more aesthetically pleasing to the eyes. In his 2001 film, The Piano Teacher, we get a 7-minute sequence shot of Erica and Walter's distressing sexual encounter. According to Haneke, it was essential the film was on a higher level aesthetically to prevent its depiction of sexual acts from being perceived only as provocative, distracting the audience away from its true purpose, to give an unbiased look at the complexity of human desire. And that's the key to understanding this first segment. Objectivity. While Haneke does exert a sense of absolute control with his style, forcing the audience to bear the violence and sorrow in real time, such exhortation to surrender is always accompanied by a gentle stroke of truthfulness, where the images hold sincerity and neutrality. And this brings me to a film of his from the year 2000 that I personally think best exemplifies his style. Code Unknown. This film, which tells a story of 4 different individuals in a non-linear and segmented fashion, is made up of 44 scenes, of which 43 of them are sequence shots. The long takes are especially meaningful for Code Unknown because the story begins with a clash of unlikely, unrelated characters, each with their own history, and the produced conflict cannot be resolved until the viewers understand where each character comes from. The problem, of course, is that the story is fragmented. The pieces needed to finish the puzzle are mostly missing, and the audience must derive their own conclusions from a glimpse. The static camera therefore plays a crucial role in portraying the key moments of each character as honestly as can be, without any prejudice or bias. This approach generates an exotic dynamic in storytelling, where the film denies guidance to key elements within the frame. Mundane shots of everyday occurrences confuse the viewers first before unfolding its significance, demanding reflection of the moment that preceded the unforeseen revelation. At times, the film denies progression, impelling the audience to stay with the moment that has already passed, rejecting distance from the often tragic image on screen. And at other times, the film simply refuses to reveal at all, urging the viewers to guide their own tour and discover what is hidden within the frame. The byproduct of objectivity therefore entails mandatory participation, where we must bring our own ideas and thoughts to the film. The tendency for people to be fascinated, or at least not as repulsed, by horrendous situations presented in films is mostly attributed to the figurative distance they have from the projected image. By narrowing this gap with realistic, immobile shots, the film becomes tougher to witness as irrelevant. Then there is the way he presents the event. More often than not, his films contain episodes that begin in medias res and end abruptly. This is again most notable in Code Unknown, where scenes repeatedly cut in the middle of the conversation and jump to another seemingly unrelated episode. Such editing not only generates but maintains and even heightens tension within the scene. A simpler example of this can be found in his 2009 film, The White Ribbon, where bypassed expositions provoke confusion and misunderstanding that sustain the stress of the moment.
Obwohl jeder im Dorf weiß, dass du sie genauso mies behandelst wie mich.
Take this scene, where the doctor tells his midwife,
Mein Gott, warum stirbst du nicht einfach?
The scene that immediately follows is that of a funeral procession, implying her actual death. The audience stays in disbelief for a short while until the film reveals that it's the farmer who has passed away, not the midwife. How about this scene, where after the pastor lectures his son for masturbating, we cut to this. It's actually a scene involving the doctor and his midwife, but the timing of the cut and the setting of the shot imply otherwise. The audience is never granted a second to be at ease. Pairing that with the strategically created space of aforementioned introspection, where the audience must mentally engage with the film, and the atrocity of the misleading cuts, the film becomes a giant ride of agitation and suspicion that must be tolerated until the very end. Such subversion of expectation doesn't stop at exhibiting a series of visual cues. Haneke expands and applies this idea to the conventions of a genre film, building his works in ways that create specific anticipations, only to turn 180 and head into a new territory that elicits retrospection and demands careful inspection of unfamiliar philosophies.
Cock it.
A lecturer in film studies, Mattias Frey, has suggested in his article that Haneke's 1992 film Benny's Video is a work that best illustrates this idea, leading the audience into an accustomed territory of genre conventions, only to betray its flow and make a sharp turn. This is most evident in the sequence that has Benny meet and invite a girl over to his place. Not only is this a typical scenario for a lot of films, but it also follows that exact tempo of the classic boy-girl spectacle, convincing the audience that the meeting will lead to some form of physical intimacy, until Benny just kills the girl. As if to hammer the point home, no pun intended, Benny even tidies the girl's skirt as she lies dead on the floor to reject all sexual potential. As Mattias states, Haneke brings an unexpected twist to the narrative by revoking the concept of sexually realized subjectivity and substitutes it with the idea of total segregation and control over one's own world through media and violence as the true form of self-realization. For Benny, elimination of potentially desirable objects only helps him grow in his isolated world that he deems is authentic. And we're left dismayed and unguarded by the unanticipated departure.
Entschuldigung.
Every argument made thus far reinforces the key reason why Michale Haneke's films are so challenging to watch. Haneke is the god of his films, and we are unconsciously worn down by the sense of powerlessness, both through the film's form and through watching the characters go through a similar defeat. In Cachet, the videotapes play this role as an omniscient and omnipotent presence, blurring the line between the film and its components, often recording from places where a camera could not have been and seamlessly connecting the actual film narrative with its existence, stopping, rewinding, and fast-forwarding as it wishes. The mediatic intrusion proves to be just as tormenting in funny games, where the two antagonists often tease the audience by breaking the fourth wall to remind of the characters, and in turn our fate, and go as far as literally rewinding the film with a remote, changing its outcome and wielding complete control over its movement.
Das hättest du nicht tun sollen, Anna. Die Spielregel bricht man nicht.
Such interference restrains the audience and shackles them along with the characters, eradicating the boundaries between real and fiction and placing them out of their comfort zone. Finally, in Code Unknown, the interruption that happens mid-conversation with black inserts and illustration of a film within a film keeps the audience on edge, forbidding them from anticipating, foretelling, or even recalling. The boundaries are pushed further when the main protagonist, who plays an actress, acts out a scene that is not part of the main film narrative, but is displayed as such. The distinction is defined only when Haneke permits.
Regarde trop face caméra.
La marque est tombée. Pendant le panneau sur...
And because such control is what arguably makes his films profoundly disturbing, he finds no need to bombard his works with on-screen violence. Instead, they happen outside the screen, behind closed doors or through a filter that obscures its visible detail, while magnifying its audible aspects. This isn't to say his films don't have such scenes. There are plenty, and we'll get to this in a bit, but we're not interested in violence itself as much as where they come from. You see, what Haneke is looking to achieve through the implied violence or otherwise is to remind the audience of the space that exists outside the frame. A scene from Code Unknown that we didn't go over in our analysis of long takes is the infamous apartment scene, where Anne is found ironing some shirts while watching TV. This 2-minute sequence is set up to look as flat and ordinary as possible, while still containing and appropriately visualizing all objects that play a role in expanding the film space. The set design is clustered and claustrophobic, with a shot of the room lacking depth. The camera stays completely fixed, withholding information about the room that could have been provided by movements or cuts to different angles. In place of the needed inertia are layers of different sounds that shift our attention to the world beyond. First, we hear the news and subtle noises of ironing. Already, the film draws our attention to the unfathomable nature of interpersonal relationships, separated by culture, experience, traditions, and ideologies. This limitation, which is one of the main issues dealt with in this film, is only as tangible as the TV screen and as real as its reflection on the pane of glass. What interrupts this is a distant but clear sound of domestic violence that gets amplified when Anne lowers the TV volume. The disturbing sound persists for quite some time until eventually the focus returns to the news on TV when Anne turns the volume back up. The only device of control in this scene is the remote, which is a recurring object in Haneke films. By introducing various sounds of the world, literally and figuratively, the scene hints at what exists outside this limited frame of reality and how regularly they are overpowered by our lack of understanding, or perhaps our lack of desire to engage at all, willingly turning it off with our remote. Culture, violence, communication, and whatnot are all actively dealt with via the short, passive minutes of mundanity. The meticulous structuring of these films asks those watching to stay with and ponder their importance. In this way, Haneke films are memorable because they are non-consumable. The reason for his style, both cinematically and thematically, all comes down to his effort to avoid producing consumable entertainment, which he believes is easier to forget. Now, he isn't against consumable content per se, he simply wants to do justice when discussing problematic topics, which he almost always does.
Also es wäre schon, wenn es eine schlimme Situation gibt, dass man die so zeigen kann oder auch nicht zeigen kann, aber das ist für den Zuschauer schwer erträglich ist, weil dann geht es halt tiefer als übers Konsumieren hinaus.
One way he avoids this, apart from the recurring style and themes mentioned previously, is by including an ideal scene in every film he makes. According to Haneke, a scene is ideal when the viewers are urged to look away due to its taxing quality. Some of his films are easier to watch than others, but it's undoubtedly true that every single Haneke film has at least one unforgettable moment, for better or for worse. This is presumably why there are just as many instances of on-screen violence in his films as the subtle off-screen violence we've discussed. If done right, they can meaningfully function as the ideal scene that gives the final blow. Another way he delivers the punch is by never resolving the conflict, as demonstrated in both Cachet and The White Ribbon. In Cachet, the culprit responsible for the mysterious tapes is never clarified. There are hints that point fingers at a particular character, but no matter who we land on, the dots never fully get connected. The White Ribbon is perhaps less investigative, but is still perfectly ambiguous as to who has been committing the crime in the neighborhood.
Das weiß ich nicht.
Now, granted, it's less about creating mystery and more about the execution, and therefore, most people find it safe to assume the children are responsible. Similarly, in his 2012 film Amour, the visual metaphor of what could potentially be the husband's death, longing, and a recap of the couple's truthful love omits the actuality of his last minutes. This film, too, isn't about solving a mystery, and therefore the precise details are less influential, but the fact that Haneke never spells out the answers is valid and applicable. Also, the unsettled issues don't have to be all-encompassing. They can be shown in fragments, like in our Code Unknown, where the audience must piece out the story, the different perspective, and even gestures. It can come in forms of implied violence and forced surveillance, in forms of wrongful accusations, involuntary acquittal, and of visual trickery.
Aber der Sinn, der dahinter ist natürlich der, den Zuschauer dazu zu provozieren, eine Antwort auf diese vordergründigen Fragen zu finden, sich mit der Gesamtproblematik noch einmal auseinanderzusetzen und auf dem Weg diese banalen Fragen zu beantworten, wer jetzt der Täter ist, sozusagen sich auch die Fragen über die grundsätzlichen Fragen zu stellen.
Again, this is all about necessitating participation. Haneke compels the viewers to project their own psyche into the film and forbids simple consumption. You must be present with the film in the same space and not away from it, unrelated.
Do you think it's enough? I mean, you want a real ending, right? With plausible plot development, don't you?
It's no secret that Haneke is fully aware of his power and his maneuvers. That's probably why he boldly decides to give away the film's intentions in opening shots of many of his films. For instance, in Amour, the film begins by having the camera stare at the spectators instead of the stage of a piano performance. This bizarre shot, while being an eye-catcher, also clues that these people have no control over the performance, that they cannot participate and can only watch and react. As such, the two protagonists spend the majority of the film helpless and dependent, unable to act, participate, or interact. Watching their suffering as the audience, also unable to jump in and intervene. Then we have Cachet, where its deceptive opening shot mirrors and foreshadows the film's overall direction. As the shot transforms in our minds from a still to a moving image, and from a film to footage being watched by the characters in their living room, Cachet visually discloses its hidden objective. that the film isn't about uncovering the mystery, but about using the mystery as a catalyst to actively explore the topics of guilt and violence. Accordingly, what benefits us is also the very act of exploration, not the answer we are wired to seek. If at all, the question shouldn't be about who or why, but what and when. Finally, Code Unknown greets us with an innocent game of charades. We stare at the film that is communicating an idea that we cannot fully grasp. We only get a vague sense of its meaning and come up with potential answers, but they are not necessarily what the girl intends nor what she represents. And we'll never know. Like the echoing gaps found within the film's narrative, the space between the director and the audience is just as visible and frightening. Similar to the kids who were staring back at the girl without a clue of what she was hoping to describe, we watch in bewilderment as the boy mimes a question of his own. The insignificance of the true answer is almost certain, as the communication barrier, while confirming the film's theme, is just that, a barrier Haneke has placed as a division between him and the viewers. The gaps found between the bodies on screen are exactly what the film paints and simultaneously where any relevance is found. The answer is in what you feel, not what you decode. And therefore, everything must Thank you as always for watching my video, everyone. If you love technical and daring directors like Michale Haneke, I recommend you check out Mubi, the sponsor for this video. Mubi is an online curated cinema streaming service that premieres a new hand-picked film every day. One of the things I really like about Mubi is that they not only have a library of well-known films from iconic directors, but also have special sections where they'll focus on specific time periods or even actors and actresses. For example, in Canada, we currently have a section dedicated to films that feature Isabelle Huppert, an iconic French actress who has also starred in numerous films by Michale Haneke. This is a great way to explore and discover new directors and films, so if you're wondering what you should watch next, I recommend you visit Mubi today. In fact, you can get an extended 30-day free trial right now if you sign up using my link at mubi.com/SpikimaMovies. That's mubi.com/SpikimaMovies. Go check it out, and thanks for watching.